Around the world, millions of people are on the move. Unaccompanied minors are once again surging over the U.S.-Mexico border. War is driving Syrians, Afghans, and others into Europe. And the combination of rising refugee numbers with terrorism fears has fueled ugly talk on the presidential campaign trail. But every day, a different immigrant reality plays out in the New York City area with little fanfare in immigration courts. This is where undocumented immigrants who are detained by the feds end up facing deportation, sometimes without a lawyer, in courts where the rules of evidence are lax, or spending years in detention just waiting to hear their fate. The system and efforts to fix it are the subject of a city limits investigation this week. So I'm happy to welcome to the studio Batya Ungar-Sargon, who reported the story. Nice work, Batya. Talia Peleg, a staff attorney in the immigration unit at the Brooklyn Defender Services. Welcome. And Neka Epishima, a Queens resident who herself experienced immigration detention. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Batya, we've all watched courtroom dramas, Matlock, Law and Order, Perry Mason. Immigration courts, do they resemble those?
They are very, very different, Jared, and I'm so glad we got to write this story and tell this really important story. People don't realize that because immigration is a civil rather than a criminal issue, that immigrants are not afforded the same due process and the same rights as citizens in this country. Even people who are here sometimes legally, who have a green card or who are legal permanent residents, are often have their civil rights completely abused in this system. It's unjust, and I'm so glad that we got to report on this.
And the courts, just for viewers who aren't initiated at all, these handle questions about deportation, questions about asylum. What is the day-to-day of the court system?
So the courts are divided into two. There's the detained docket and the non-detained docket. So people who are in this country who are immigrants who have not committed any crimes, those people are on the non-detained docket, and they will come into court for asylum cases. They will come into court to have their fate determined whether or not they can legally stay in this country. However, there are also people, immigrants who have committed a crime or had some sort of brush with the criminal justice system, and these people are frequently detained years and years and sometimes even decades after they have committed that crime. Immigration officials will show up at their door and take them into mandatory custody, where they will be kept and held in prison until their court date, sometimes without a bond hearing, sometimes without a lawyer.
Talia, one of the quirks of the system that strikes me is that while there is a right to counsel, there's no right to being provided counsel, which is different from Miranda rights that we all hear on the TV. You are a lawyer who operates in that court. What difference do lawyers make? I understand it has a huge effect on the outcome of cases.
Absolutely. You know, I'm very proud to be part of a project here in New York City called Knife Up, New York Immigrant Family Unity Project. And New York City Council has taken the initiative to say that they've seen New York families torn apart by this detention system and the immigration system coming and taking family members away and putting them in lockup, and that the New York City now is funding a project to have the city tax dollars pay for attorneys to represent immigrants in detention, and that's the work I do day in and day out. And I can say over the last year and a half since the project has begun, the impact is immense. We see that issues are being taken more seriously. The judges and the government lawyers have to answer to, you know, our arguments on behalf of our clients, where before, just to give you a scene, clients would come in, non-citizens shackled in jumpsuits, and they still do, but face a trained lawyer, face a trained judge who clearly understands immigration law, and have to defend themselves in this very complex arena, which is often equated with tax law. So the need for immigration attorneys to represent and explain their clients' rights before the tribunal is absolutely essential, and it's making a key difference every day. And I'm happy that New York City has made the initiative, at least in the detention context, to provide those who can't afford a lawyer with a lawyer. But this is not being replicated throughout the country yet. We hope it will be. But people are still struggling all over this country, detained without an attorney. And on the non-detained docket, this project does not exist.
Yeah, I read that something like half of people who go before immigration court nationwide do so without the assistance of an attorney at all, which is kind of remarkable. Neka, you had your own experience with the system. Tell us how that happened and what that was like.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me once again. It was just a very excruciating experience. I'm I'm a mental health counselor, and I had a brush with the law about almost 20 years ago. Immigration never came to me. I was never detained by immigration. And then I was driving, and I got stopped, and I had a suspended license. And I was in Nassau County. And because I had the suspended license, I was detained by Nassau County Police, but Nassau County has ICE, immigration on grounds. So they automatically apprehended me there, talked to me, and said that they were going to put a hold on me. So apparently, if I was going to leave after being in court, then that means immigration would have to take me into custody. After that, I wouldn't be going home, and that's exactly what happened.
And how long were you in custody?
I was in custody with immigration for altogether 9 months.
Wow.
And initially when I came in, I had a paid lawyer who had charged me almost $40,000. And I couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford to pay the lawyer any longer. So I was very glad when I heard about this program, and I had to qualify for it. And I was able to get the lawyers from Knife Up, and I tell you, from the beginning of their process with me to the end was very professional. Not just professional, they were there for me. They made sure that everything was taken care of. They made sure that I was represented properly. And in between all that, if it wasn't for them, I would not be out right now, because actually they implemented a course that allowed me to get out of jail in 6 months. Well, after being there for 6 months or better, so.
Bhatia, elements of NECA's story remind me of Alex Laura, the young man who you profile in the piece that we'll be running this week. Talk about his case and how his case has affected others.
Well, Alex came to this country at 7 years old. When he was in his 30s, he had a brush with the law, drug charge, and he I can't talk about it because of the ongoing immigration, but he had basically, he settled for 5 years of probation. He didn't do any jail time. And then 3 years later, in the middle of the night, ICE officials came. They told him, "You're getting deported." And he had no idea why. They shackled him and they took him to the Hudson prison. And he was there for 6 months. And he was sitting there and he told us, it's one thing to go to jail for having committed a crime. You're sitting there because of the crime you committed. But I had this brush with the criminal justice system. And they determined that I did not need to go to jail, that I was not a danger to the society, that I was rehabilitated. And then a second time to be put in prison on taxpayers' dollars, no less. It was very upsetting. And while he was there, his child was taken into foster care. But because he met Talia through the Knife Up program, Talia and her colleagues filed a habeas corpus petition, which is a wrongful imprisonment petition. And because of that, the Second Circuit ruled that they found with Alex Laura, and because of that, all of the detainees are now eligible for a bond hearing. They can only be in prison for 6 months, and then they have to have a bond hearing before a judge, which is a basic civil right.
What's the impact of that been?
Yeah, it's been tremendous. I think it's hard for us to believe, living in the communities we do, and that people could be sitting in jail for up to 6 months. Think about that, without a right to have a judge determine whether you should be there or not. And that is as fundamental a consideration that a judge is trained to do as anything, really, to weigh in the interests. Do you deserve to be in detention away from your family? Many clients lose their jobs or have citizen children, like Mr. Laura's son is a U.S. citizen. Miss NECA's parents are citizens, her entire family, really. And people are being torn away without an opportunity to explain why they should be there. Custody should be an extreme measure, pulling someone out of their system and detaining them far away without the ability to work, without the ability to function as a human. And especially, I think, what Bhatia said, for many people, even if they have had prior criminal convictions, they've been punished through the criminal justice system, which we as a society have decided is the appropriate mechanism to punish criminal behavior. And then for them to years later be charged in this immigration system that's supposed to be civil in nature, where the penalty is deportation, which arguably is more severe than any jail time, at least for many clients of mine, as they've expressed the possibility of expulsion from the country they consider home. We really need to wonder, is this the way we should be treating our citizens, people of our community, and many of whom are lawful permanent residents, have been here for years. And, to get back to your question, we're seeing many people now are finally having these hearings after months and months of detention. And we've been able to successfully get many individuals out because of the Laura decision. And I think that shows that if bond rules were a little less lenient, that many people should not be in detention, and they are, unfortunately.
Nika, in your case, when you got out after 9 months, great news, you're out, but what was it like kind of putting your life back together? What had the effect of detention been on everything you had going on before?
Oh, man, I can't even start to explain it. First of all, I was on the deportation list. So without Knife Up, I was going to be deported, period. And so living the life out in jail and then coming out is like I'm trying to get my life together. I'm also on the side like a gospel jazz artist. So it's been, I could tell you, being in jail, if it wasn't for God and for my faith and in turning my life over completely to God the way that I felt that I had to, coming out now and being able to plug myself back into community hasn't been too much of a struggle. It's just what can I keep up, and it's been working out so far. And it's been a struggle. It's been a struggle, but it's I just thank God that I've been able to would I say educate myself with being in jail, and then be able to give myself plans, goals to reach, to attain now that I'm out here. So I'm working on it.
Where are you from originally, I should ask?
Nigeria.
Oh, very
yes.
So pulling back from these individual cases and even the Laura decision, one thing that strikes me about your reporting, Bhatia, is just how arbitrary the system is. New Yorkers have access to lawyers, other people don't. Different judges, vastly different outcomes. Some people are deserving of staying here, and others with equally harrowing stories aren't. Is that what you found? It's a very selective system.
I mean, it's astounding. I can't even express to you what it's like to sit in a courtroom and have people come in orange jumpsuits, shackled, representing themselves because they can't afford a lawyer. And then we call that system civil, right? But yes, to your question, the arbitrariness is astounding. I mean, I sat for 2 days in one judge's court and he gave no one bond. Next 2 days I sat in another judge's court and she gave everybody bond, right? It's just completely arbitrary. One of the judges said to me, it's like a traffic court setting, but what we're doing here is capital cases, right? Because sending somebody back to a country that is, dangerous, or for all the reasons that they came here in the first place, that could mean their life.
What's just a quick question, translation services, how are they provided? Is that generally a robust system?
So in the non-detained docket, so when I was in Federal Plaza, people who are not in detention, the translators did seem very well prepared. They were able to simultaneously translate. But when I went to the Elizabeth courts to watch people who are in detention, they didn't have a translator. They were using a call-in service. Now, bear in mind that the detainees were calling in via teleconference from the jail. So you have a person in a prison you've been through this, through a television screen, talking to a judge, and then the translator is on the phone in the courtroom speaking on speakerphone. I mean, it was ridiculous.
That sounds like a foolproof system. So Talia, you are in an interesting position because you see how this plays out in Brooklyn, you see how it plays out in local courts, and that is a piece of this national immigration debate. I'm sure there are 1,000 things you could add, but if there was one thing you wanted people running for president, people making this policy to know about the current system that you see every day, what would it be? What's the thing that's missing from the typical public debate about immigration?
I think an awareness of how immigrants are being treated, that immigrants are at home at night, sleeping at 6 in the morning, being woken up, taken into custody, shackled, the people who work in our local grocery stores, the people who raise our children, the people who, especially for New Yorkers, and I would say the Brooklyn community, realizing that the immigration system impacts all of us, and that the basic question is, what rights does someone have, even those who are potentially in another camp and not as enmeshed in immigration issues as I am. What kind of rights does an individual deserve when they're facing a court of law? And I think people don't know that people don't have lawyers, don't have competent lawyers, are often spending $40,000. That is not the first time I've heard that on attorneys who are not giving them the kind of representation they deserve. And I would just say that the number one focus needs to be that what kind of rights do we want immigrants to have, people facing severe penalties in this country who contribute to this country? They should at least have basic due process, at least have the right to be interviewed and represented by a lawyer who is competent to represent their needs. And I think that fundamentally, without that, what kind of country, are we living in? This is the United States, and we pride ourselves on providing due process, on justice, and the immigration courts are severely lacking in those areas. And I think all of us need to start caring.
Buddy, I'm curious, what do you think? The court system
Totally
is part
agree.
of, well, and the segment here, but the immigration court system is part of this immigration system. And even if the courts were improved, there's a volume issue. There's the laws they're interpreting. Can we fix immigration courts without fixing the underlying policy issues, do you think? Is there a way to get a better immigration court without fixing the overall system?
I think there are small things that could be implemented right away that could help with a lot of these issues, but absent sort of a larger national conversation, we're really grasping at straws here. I mean, the arbitrariness, the lack of due process, like Taya said, is that who we are as a country? Is that the impression of ourselves that we want to be exporting to the world as we deport these people, especially with a president who's deported more people than any other president in the history of this country,
Do you agree?
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And I think people are not aware that, under President Obama, more people have been deported than ever, that there is a quota. I think average citizens have no idea. There is a quota, a mandate of how many immigration beds need to be filled every night. Mm-hmm. Is that how we want justice to be served, that they have to go do a new raid because some beds are empty? That is not how I want my tax dollars spent. There are many other things I think that could benefit our society. And I agree, I do think the laws fundamentally need to change. But shy of that, the Department of Homeland Security, who is the prosecutor in these matters, issued something called prosecutorial discretion. John Morton, the former DHS secretary, issued who should be a priority for deportation. As you said, the backlogs are enormous, and gave certain guidelines of who should be a priority. And I've had cases where maybe there was a former criminal conviction years ago, and my client does not fall on the priorities, should not be a priority, and I still have tremendous difficulty, almost complete, in getting the Department of Homeland Security to not prioritize deporting that individual. And so there are things that can be done, small things, in figuring out how to use our resources in this very, very limited system.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you all for being here. A very important discussion to add to the debate.